February 14, 1945, Camp Aliceville, Alabama. Obergefreiter Hans Müller stared at the steaming metal cup that the American guard had placed before him, his nose wrinkling in disgust at the unfamiliar aroma rising from the dark liquid. His fellow prisoner, Gefreiter Klaus Weber, leaned over to examine the beverage with obvious contempt. "Look at this swill," Weber muttered in German, loud enough for the American guards to hear his disdainful tone. "They call this coffee? In Germany, we would not serve this to farm animals. It smells like burnt grain mixed with dishwater." Mueller nodded in agreement as he lifted the cup cautiously, expecting the worst possible taste. For 3 years of war, German propaganda had mocked American cultural inferiority, including their crude attempts at civilized beverages. Real coffee required European sophistication and centuries of refinement that Americans could never achieve. "This is what passes for culture in America," Mahler observed, taking a tentative sip before immediately grimacing. "Weak, bitter, flavorless. No wonder Americans lack the refinement to appreciate proper European civilization." But what Obergefreiter Mahler could not know, what 12 years of Nazi cultural superiority propaganda had made impossible for him to comprehend, was that he was about to begin an obsession that would transform his understanding of American abundance, industrial capacity, and cultural sophistication. The second sip was somehow different. Not better exactly, but curious, familiar in a way that disturbed him. German confidence in February 1945 was not mere cultural arrogance, it was based on ideological certainty derived from Nazi propaganda about German cultural superiority and American barbarism. For 12 years, German civilians had been taught that Americans lacked the cultural sophistication necessary for civilized living. At the heart of this confidence stood German cultural doctrine that equated refinement with European tradition and dismissed American innovations as crude imitations lacking authentic cultural value. German coffee culture represented centuries of sophisticated development that Americans could never duplicate or understand. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda, had personally overseen cultural education programs that emphasized German superiority in all aspects of civilized life. His philosophy was crystal clear and had been drilled into every German citizen. Americans possess material wealth, but lack the cultural refinement that defines true civilization. The German understanding of coffee culture seemed to support these sweeping claims about cultural hierarchy. Traditional German coffee preparation involved careful roasting processes, precise grinding techniques, and elaborate brewing ceremonies that demonstrated cultural sophistication and aristocratic refinement. American coffee appeared mass-produced and culturally inferior by comparison. German prisoners at Camp Aliceville believed American coffee would reflect the general crudeness that Nazi propaganda attributed to American culture throughout the war years. Mass production meant inferior quality by definition. Democratic equality meant lowest common denominator taste that could never satisfy refined European palates. Intelligence reports from German prisoners in other American camps seemed to confirm these cultural expectations and stereotypes. American food and beverages were consistently described as adequate for basic survival, but lacking the refinement that European palates required. Coffee was frequently mentioned as particularly disappointing and crude. The German dismissal of American coffee culture stemmed from deeply held cultural conviction that refinement required tradition, ceremony, and aristocratic standards that democratic societies could never achieve through mass production methods. American egalitarianism meant cultural degradation rather than advancement. Oberst Heinrich Weber, former cultural affairs officer in occupied Paris, had briefed fellow prisoners on expected American cultural limitations based on his extensive experience with American materials captured during the German retreat from France. Americans mass-produce everything, including coffee, expect quantity without quality, substance without sophistication. The German assessment was culturally consistent with Nazi ideology that viewed American civilization as materialistic, but spiritually and aesthetically inferior to European cultural achievements. Coffee quality required cultural sophistication that democratic societies allegedly could not develop through industrial methods. But what German cultural intelligence failed to understand was the revolutionary foundation of American consumer culture that had transformed basic commodities into sophisticated products through industrial innovation and democratic demand for quality rather than aristocratic exclusivity. At the Folgers Coffee Company in San Francisco, American industrial methods were producing coffee quality that exceeded anything European aristocracy had ever tasted, while making it affordable for ordinary citizens rather than restricting access to elite classes. Democratic capitalism had revolutionized rather than degraded cultural products through systematic innovation. What they discovered through decades of consumer-driven development was that mass production combined with competitive consumer markets could achieve quality standards that traditional European methods had never approached while making luxury accessible to populations that European aristocratic systems had systematically excluded. The transformation began on February 14, 1945, when German prisoners at Camp Aliceville received their first systematic exposure to American coffee culture during Valentine's Day celebrations. that included special meals and beverages for all prisoners, regardless of rank or political affiliation. Sergeant Robert Anderson became the supervisor of prisoner services at Camp Aliceville after transferring from combat duty in the Pacific Theater. A former restaurant manager from Seattle who understood both professional food service and human psychology, he developed programs designed to demonstrate American cultural values through daily experiences rather than propaganda lectures. The American approach to prisoner coffee service represented everything German cultural doctrine opposed and dismissed as impossible. Instead of elaborate ceremony and restricted access based on social hierarchy, it implemented systematic abundance, designed to provide quality beverages to everyone, regardless of social status, military rank, or cultural background. The abundant coffee service that German prisoners expected to be culturally inferior and industrially crude proved to be systematically superior to anything most had experienced during their military service or civilian life in Germany. When American industrial methods focused on consumer satisfaction rather than aristocratic exclusivity, they achieved quality that traditional European methods had never produced. But the true revelation lay in American coffee logistics systems that could provide unlimited high-quality coffee to thousands of prisoners while maintaining combat operations and civilian rationing throughout wartime. German coffee scarcity had made quality seem impossible during wartime, but Americans were providing luxury to enemies. The first major demonstration came on February 14, 1945, during the Valentine's Day meal service at Camp Aliceville. American guards provided unlimited coffee to over 8,000 German prisoners using industrial coffee preparation methods that maintained consistent quality at unprecedented volume levels. Sergeant Anderson supervised the implementation of coffee service procedures that included fresh brewing every 2 hours throughout the day, unlimited refills for all prisoners without restriction, and quality standards that exceeded anything German military mess halls had provided to their own officers during peacetime operations. Obergefreiter Müller watched in growing amazement as American guards continuously refilled massive coffee urns with fresh brew throughout the entire day, without any apparent concern for resource waste or economic efficiency. The abundance seemed criminally wasteful by German wartime standards, but the quality remained consistently high despite massive volume production. "They are wasting coffee like water," Weber observed with mounting confusion as he accepted his third cup of the day, his initial disgust giving way to reluctant appreciation. In Germany, officers received one small cup of ersatz coffee daily when supplies permitted. These Americans provide unlimited real coffee to enemy prisoners. The systematic coffee abundance represented the first major shock in German prisoners' understanding of American industrial and cultural capacity. Nazi propaganda had predicted scarcity and inferior quality, but American systems were providing luxury abundance that German civilians had never experienced, even during prosperous peacetime periods. American coffee logistics demonstrated immediate capacity to provide prisoner comfort and luxury, while simultaneously supporting major combat operations across multiple theaters of war. German forces had never achieved such resource abundance, even for elite SS units, yet Americans provided luxury beverages to captured enemies without apparent economic concern. But something more disturbing was happening to Müller personally. He was beginning to look forward to each serving. If you were witnessing this incredible demonstration of American abundance that challenged everything Nazi propaganda taught about democratic culture and industrial capacity, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. This story of cultural transformation gets even more shocking. The second revelation came during the evening meal service, when German prisoners discovered that American coffee service included variety options that exceeded anything available to German civilians during peacetime prosperity before wartime rationing began. The variety itself challenged fundamental assumptions about mass production limitations. Regular coffee brewed to professional standards, decaffeinated coffee for those with medical restrictions, coffee with various cream and sugar options, all available on demand without rationing restrictions or bureaucratic approval processes. The systematic variety contradicted every Nazi prediction about mass production limitations and democratic mediocrity. More shocking than the variety itself was the consistent quality across all available options. American industrial methods achieved standardization that ensured every cup met professional quality standards, regardless of preparation time, serving location, or volume demands throughout the facility. "Look at this coffee preparation," Müller whispered to Weber as they watched American kitchen staff working with professional equipment that exceeded German restaurant standards. They use more coffee beans for enemy prisoners than German households received in entire months during rationing. The professional coffee preparation challenged everything German prisoners understood about American cultural sophistication and resource allocation priorities. Instead of crude mass production methods, they witnessed careful preparation procedures that exceeded German restaurant standards during peacetime operations. American coffee culture demonstrated systematic attention to quality that transcended wartime limitations and prisoner status considerations. Coffee preparation received the same professional attention, regardless of whether consumers were American soldiers, civilian workers, or enemy prisoners captured during combat operations. The professional focus represented food service administration that transcended national boundaries and political conflicts when implemented according to systematic quality standards rather than political hierarchy or cultural prejudice. 3 weeks after his arrival at Camp Aliceville, Muller experienced what he would later describe as the most confusing cultural crisis of his entire life. Instead of gradually losing interest in American coffee as expected, he found himself anticipating each meal specifically for the coffee service rather than food. The anticipation confused and disturbed Muller because German cultural training had taught him to disdain American cultural products as inferior substitutes for European refinement and sophistication. Yet he was beginning to prefer American coffee to anything he had experienced during his military service or civilian life in Germany. "I find myself thinking about the next coffee serving," Muller confided to Weber during private evening discussions in their barracks. "The flavor has become familiar, then comfortable, then somehow necessary. I do not understand how supposedly inferior American coffee could create such personal satisfaction." Weber's response revealed his own psychological transformation and growing confusion about everything they had been taught. "Because maybe we were wrong about everything they told us about American culture and civilization." The psychological attachment to American coffee challenged fundamental German assumptions about cultural superiority and consumer preferences that Nazi ideology had promoted throughout the war. Products that Nazi doctrine claimed were inferior were producing satisfaction and even dependency that German products had never achieved. American coffee culture had achieved something that German cultural theory claimed was scientifically impossible through racial doctrine, mass-produced products that exceeded traditional quality while creating consumer loyalty through systematic satisfaction rather than cultural tradition or aristocratic authority. The satisfaction derived from American coffee suggested that democratic consumer culture could produce superior results compared to aristocratic cultural traditions through systematic attention to consumer preferences rather than traditional authority structures or inherited social hierarchy. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come, and it would challenge everything these men believed about civilization itself. December brought Christmas celebrations that included special coffee service with additional varieties and preparation methods that introduced German prisoners to American coffee culture at its most sophisticated level during traditional holiday meal services that exceeded anything they had experienced. American guards prepared specialty coffee drinks that included flavored varieties, cream-based preparations, and holiday spice combinations that exceeded anything German coffee shops had offered during peacetime celebrations before wartime rationing restrictions eliminated luxury options. "They are serving coffee preparations I never knew existed," Weber observed with undisguised amazement during Christmas morning coffee service, his worldview continuing to crumble. Flavored varieties, cream-based drinks, spiced preparations. This represents cultural sophistication that exceeds anything German coffee establishments offered before the war began. The specialty coffee service challenged fundamental German assumptions about American cultural limitations and European superiority that had been central to Nazi ideology. American coffee innovation had achieved complexity and sophistication that traditional European methods had never developed through centuries of aristocratic refinement. American coffee innovation demonstrated systematic cultural advancement that transcended traditional European limitations through consumer-driven development rather than aristocratic tradition or inherited cultural authority. Democratic culture had produced sophistication that aristocratic culture had never approached through systematic innovation. The Christmas coffee service included preparation demonstrations and tasting sessions that educated German prisoners about American coffee culture while providing cultural exchange opportunities that challenged stereotypes about American refinement and European superiority. January 1946 brought systematic implementation of comprehensive coffee appreciation programs that provided German prisoners with detailed education about American coffee culture, preparation methods, and industrial systems that produced consistent quality at unprecedented scale throughout the nation. The education programs included coffee history, preparation science, and industrial methods that contradicted Nazi propaganda about American cultural inferiority and European superiority through direct instruction and hands-on experience rather than ideological interpretation or propaganda messaging. The American coffee education officer explained their industrial methods, Mueller reported during program evaluations, his respect for American culture growing daily. They achieve superior quality through scientific understanding and systematic production methods that exceed anything European coffee culture developed through centuries of traditional aristocratic approaches. American coffee science challenged fundamental German assumptions about cultural development and technological advancement that Nazi ideology had promoted. Scientific methods had achieved cultural refinement that traditional approaches had never approached through systematic study, rather than inherited tradition or cultural authority. The education discussions revealed American coffee industry capacity that German intelligence had systematically underestimated throughout the entire war effort. Coffee production, distribution, and preparation systems exceeded German capabilities by mathematical factors that seemed impossible under wartime conditions. They say American coffee production includes varieties we never heard of in Germany, observed Weber after attending comprehensive lectures on American coffee industry development and innovation, processing methods, flavor development, and distribution systems that exceed anything German industry achieved during peacetime operations before the war. The coffee industry demonstrations contradicted years of German propaganda that had consistently portrayed America as culturally backward and industrially primitive compared to European achievements. American coffee advancement had resulted from innovation capacity and consumer sophistication that German culture had never approached or understood. February brought prisoner work programs that included food service assignments, where German prisoners participated directly in coffee preparation, and service operations that demonstrated American food service standards and coffee culture at professional levels that exceeded German restaurant operations during peacetime. American food service programs included comprehensive coffee preparation training, systematic quality control procedures, and service standards that contrasted sharply with German military food service that emphasized basic functionality over quality during wartime operations and economic efficiency during peacetime. The Americans require coffee service standards that exceed German restaurant procedures, Mueller observed while participating in daily kitchen work assignments, his professional respect growing continuously. They emphasize quality control and consistency that maintains high standards regardless of volume demands or operational circumstances. American coffee service standards reflected cultural values that prioritize consumer satisfaction rather than mere adequacy or basic survival requirements during wartime. Coffee quality received systematic professional attention that German food service had never emphasized, even during prosperous peacetime periods. The contrast challenged fundamental German assumptions about the relationship between mass production methods and quality control outcomes. American systems suggested that industrial methods could enhance rather than diminish cultural products when properly implemented through consumer-focused development rather than aristocratic restriction. March brought preparation for prisoner repatriation that included devastating discussions about post-war coffee availability in occupied Germany and American coffee culture that German prisoners had learned to appreciate and depend upon during their imprisonment experience. American repatriation officers explained with professional sympathy that German coffee availability would be severely limited during post-war reconstruction periods, while American coffee culture would continue developing and improving through consumer demand and industrial innovation that exceeded wartime production levels significantly. The American officer explained that we will return to ersatz coffee substitutes in Germany while Americans continue improving their coffee quality and variety. Weber reported during repatriation briefings, genuine distress evident in his voice. They possess coffee abundance that will increase during peacetime, while Germany faces continued severe scarcity for years. American coffee abundance during active wartime suggested peacetime capacity that would exceed German capabilities by mathematical factors that made meaningful comparison impossible. German coffee culture would require decades to recover basic availability, while American culture continued advancing and innovating. The repatriation preparation included frank acknowledgement that German prisoners had experienced coffee quality and abundance that would not be available in post-war Germany for many years. American coffee culture had systematically spoiled German prisoners for available German alternatives. They warn us that German coffee will seem inferior after experiencing American coffee culture, Mueller observed during departure preparations, anxiety evident in his voice and demeanor. This represents cultural superiority we were taught could not exist in democratic American civilization. American coffee superiority challenged fundamental Nazi assumptions about cultural development and European advantages that had justified the entire war effort. Democratic consumer culture had achieved refinement and sophistication that aristocratic traditions had never produced through systematic innovation rather than inherited authority. But the psychological impact of leaving this abundance behind would prove more devastating than any battlefield defeat. If you want to see how this incredible coffee obsession completely transformed German understanding of American consumer culture and influenced post-war reconstruction efforts, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. April brought final prisoner departures that included emotional farewell coffee services, recognizing shared humanity despite former enemy status, and acknowledging cultural appreciation that had developed during imprisonment through daily coffee experiences that transcended national boundaries and political conflicts. American guards who had supervised daily coffee service participated in departure ceremonies that included final coffee servings and genuine expressions of hope that German prisoners would remember American coffee culture and hospitality positively despite the wartime circumstances that had brought them together. The American sergeant who supervised our daily coffee service prepared special farewell coffee, Weber reported in his final camp letter to family members in Germany, emotion clearly evident in his carefully chosen words. He expressed sincere hope that we would remember American hospitality and coffee culture as positive experiences, despite our status as former enemies during wartime conflict. The personal attention to coffee culture during departure ceremonies challenged racial stereotypes and national hatred that had justified wartime brutality and cultural dismissal on both sides. American coffee service had demonstrated individual humanity and cultural sophistication that transcended national and ideological classifications completely. Mueller's hands trembled noticeably as he accepted his final cup of American coffee from Sergeant Anderson. How had enemies become providers of daily comfort, cultural education, and genuine hospitality that exceeded anything he had experienced? May brought arrival in devastated Germany, where repatriated prisoners found a homeland completely transformed by military defeat and facing severe shortages that included coffee rationing, more restrictive than anything experienced during actual wartime military service or prisoner status in America. The coffee situation in Germany is dramatically worse than American prison camps, Mueller told his wife during their emotional reunion in bomb-damaged Munich, his voice carrying genuine shock. We received significantly better coffee as enemy prisoners than German civilians receive as citizens. This reveals the true scale of German defeat and American abundance. The repatriation testimonies challenged fundamental German assumptions about American culture, while creating strong foundation for post-war German appreciation of American consumer products and cultural sophistication that Nazi propaganda had systematically dismissed as inferior imitations throughout 12 years of indoctrination. The coffee comparison stories spread rapidly throughout post-war Germany, contributing to widespread acceptance of American occupation policies and democratic reform programs that included consumer culture development. German citizens learned through personal testimony that American culture included genuine sophistication rather than crude materialism. But Mueller's personal story of cultural transformation was far from over, and the addiction would persist for decades. Throughout the following months, Mueller found himself experiencing dreams about American coffee that went far beyond simple taste memory. The dreams included the abundance, the choices, the systematic quality, and everything it represented about a different way of organizing human society. "I dream about American coffee," Weber wrote in his personal diary 6 months after returning to Germany, his handwriting revealing emotional struggle, not because it was perfect, but because it represented abundance and systematic attention to human satisfaction that we never knew was possible in any civilized society. The psychological addiction had become a window into an entirely different approach to organizing civilization, one that prioritized consumer satisfaction and individual choice over traditional authority structures and inherited social hierarchy that had defined European culture for centuries. 6 months after repatriation, Mueller experienced withdrawal symptoms that went beyond physical caffeine dependency. He missed the systematic abundance, the variety of choices, the consistent quality, and the cultural sophistication that American coffee service had represented during his imprisonment. The withdrawal represented cultural mourning for a way of life that seemed impossible to recreate in post-war Germany. American consumer culture had demonstrated possibilities that German traditional culture had never conceived or achieved through centuries of development. 12 months after return, Mueller began actively seeking American coffee products in German shops, paying premium prices that strained his limited budget for imported varieties that provided connection to transformative experiences he could never forget or abandon. The search for American coffee became a search for cultural validation and systematic quality that German alternatives could never provide. American coffee represented proof that democratic consumer culture could achieve sophistication that exceeded aristocratic traditions through systematic attention to individual satisfaction. 18 months after repatriation, Mueller began corresponding with former American guards from Camp Aliceville, maintaining relationships that transcended former enemy status through shared appreciation for coffee culture and human dignity that had developed during imprisonment. The correspondence included requests for coffee shipments and cultural exchange that demonstrated how American coffee service had created lasting bonds between former enemies. Coffee had become a bridge between different approaches to organizing human civilization and cultural development. 2 years after the war ended, Mueller received his first package of American coffee from Sergeant Anderson, who had maintained personal interest in former prisoners' welfare and cultural development. The package included varieties and preparation instructions that maintained connection to transformative experiences. The coffee package represented continuing cultural education and human connection that transcended national boundaries and political conflicts. American coffee service had created relationships that survived war's end and contributed to international understanding and democratic reconstruction. The statistical accounting revealed the mathematical extent of American coffee superiority over German alternatives during and after the war. American prison camps had provided coffee quality and quantity that exceeded German civilian availability by factors that demonstrated overwhelming industrial and cultural capacity. More significantly, American coffee culture had facilitated cultural appreciation and international understanding that enhanced prisoner morale while creating positive associations with American civilization that influenced post-war relationship building and democratic reconstruction efforts throughout occupied Germany. The long-term impact extended far beyond immediate cultural benefits to comprehensive post-war consumer culture development that enabled democratic reconstruction and economic cooperation between former enemies. German prisoners who experienced American coffee culture became enthusiastic advocates for American consumer products and cultural exchanges. Modern consumer culture still follows fundamental principles established by American coffee industry development during World War II. Quality mass production achieves consumer satisfaction while maintaining affordability because extensive industrial evidence proved systematic methods achieved superior cultural results compared to traditional aristocratic limitations and restrictions. The American coffee culture revolution demonstrated conclusively that democratic consumer culture and quality production are strategically aligned rather than competing priorities. Mass production achieves superior cultural results while maintaining accessibility that enhanced rather than diminished cultural sophistication and individual satisfaction. Mueller's complete transformation from mocking American coffee to developing lifelong dependency reflected the broader German discovery that American culture included genuine sophistication and systematic quality rather than merely quantity and crudeness that Nazi propaganda had consistently claimed throughout the war. The coffee culture story demonstrates that consumer satisfaction enhances rather than diminishes cultural development while building strong foundation for international cultural exchange and democratic cooperation, essential for lasting peace and cultural understanding between former enemies and different civilizations. By 1975, 30 years after the war ended, Mueller still ordered American coffee when available in German shops, paying premium prices for imported varieties that connected him to transformative experiences that had challenged everything he believed about civilization and cultural development. That first sip taught me everything Nazi propaganda got wrong about American civilization, he told his grandson during regular family dinner conversations. Americans didn't lack culture. They had democratized luxury and made excellence accessible to ordinary people, rather than restricting it to aristocratic elites. The revelation had been profound and lasting. Democratic systems could produce cultural sophistication that exceeded aristocratic traditions through systematic attention to consumer preferences, rather than traditional authority structures and inherited social status that had defined European civilization. By the 1980s, American coffee chains began opening throughout Germany as part of cultural exchange and economic cooperation between former enemies. Former prisoners like Mueller were among their most enthusiastic and loyal customers, sometimes traveling considerable distances to experience familiar tastes that connected them to transformative experiences decades earlier. Mueller would sit in these American coffee shops, surrounded by young Germans who had never experienced wartime deprivation, watching them take for granted the abundance and variety that had once seemed impossible to achieve through any form of social organization or economic system. The final irony was complete and historically significant. The men who had initially mocked American coffee as inferior swill, unfit for farm animals, had become its most devoted advocates in post-war Germany, spreading appreciation for American consumer culture throughout their communities and families. Their testimonies influenced an entire generation of Germans who learned to appreciate American cultural sophistication through personal stories rather than political propaganda or ideological instruction. Coffee had become a vehicle for cultural understanding and international cooperation. When German prisoners first received American coffee at Camp Aliceville in February 1945, they expected confirmation of Nazi propaganda about American cultural limitations and European superiority. Instead, they discovered that democratic consumer culture had achieved quality and abundance that aristocratic traditions had never produced through centuries of development. Their addiction became living proof that American culture included genuine sophistication rather than crude materialism. And Germany never forgot the lesson that mass production could democratize luxury rather than destroy cultural refinement and individual satisfaction. The coffee obsession revealed a profound truth about human civilization and cultural development. Sometimes the enemy's greatest weapon isn't military force or political propaganda, but the simple demonstration of a superior way of organizing society that makes your own system seem primitive and inadequate by direct comparison, one perfectly brewed cup at a time.